Thanks, guys, for having me. I would like to talk about the biggest challenges of chief marketing officers these days, and as such, also about the opportunity that we have to help them in the transition. And what we see in our research is that one of those biggest challenges right now is to move from a world in which we used to focus purely on shareholder profit, short-term profit maximization, towards a model in which we create value for all stakeholders, not just for the capital markets. And that is a really difficult transition and a really big one. And it's not just my opinion. It is based on one of the most comprehensive studies on the topic of growth. What is it these days? Which we started about 5 years ago. And right now we are conducting a follow-up study together with Oxford and lots of other cool companies, which I'll tell you about later, to help identify, like, what are these building blocks? How do you get to that new world? What is the role of the chief marketing officer in doing that? And what we figured out is that by taking on that role and that responsibility, and by seizing that opportunity, these marketers are able to increase their impact for themselves, for their brands, but also for their businesses. Now that is a big opportunity. So if we as agencies can help them in that journey, I think we are in business for the next couple of years. So it's based on research. It's based on, indeed, I have about 500 chief marketing officers here under the tab, and I'm on WhatsApp the whole time. That's my role, to connect them to others, to inspire them with content from us, from you, from thought leadership, white papers, all kinds of research that the agencies do. And we always start with our executive leadership program in January in Oxford and in New York. It's a live kick-up, face-to-face, and then we go to a 20-week journey and we finish in Cannes. And one of the founders had the really brilliant idea to organize a summit right before Cannes kicks off. So when the festival kicks off on Monday, our community already starts on the Friday before, somewhere up a hill in a very cool place where we gather and create all kinds of cool sessions. Now, the executive leadership course is called the IRG 100, and the reason is that we're not so creative. And the other reason is that we only have 100 seats. And these seats are made available by companies like yours. WPP is one of the founding partners, and they nominate their biggest clients to join in our program. And for that community of 100 CMOs every year, we're now going to start in the 5th year. For them, it's just really special to be among their peers. And usually it's like high caliber marketing people that are really lonely at the top, that have to make really big decisions over huge budgets with huge teams in all kinds of countries with a lot of pressure. And to then sit in a safe place and discover, what is marketing these days? How do you do it? What can I teach you? What can you teach me? That really forms that very powerful community. And the story of the IRG begins actually in Cannes about 5 years ago, where 20 of the most influential CMOs gathered up on this ANA meeting, the American National something. The abbreviation is different than the whatever. And they kind of complained and were very vulnerable about the fact that they were losing influence. Because what was marketing then? Are you a chief experience officer or a chief growth officer or a chief revenue officer? Or what is it? What is marketing these days? Mark Ritson, which we all know, I think he calls it the department of, what is it, events and flyers, something like that. That sounds like quite a degradation of what we try to do. So marketers were losing influence. And around that same time, the Harvard Business Review, which is the thing that CEOs often read, they came up with a special on the trouble with CMOs. Short tenure, after 3 years, they're gone. What's the value of the chief marketing officer? They only spend money, whereas we would all call it an investment, of course. But it wasn't going really well with these chief marketing officers. So we thought, okay, there's an opportunity here. And WPP joined us in trying to uncover what it takes to win nowadays as a marketer, as a brand. And we talked to some really smart people, thought leaders in the field of marketing, identified like the building blocks of what was marketing about, and then we did a huge study to see if that was true and how marketers experience that. So we ran a huge quant, we talked to a lot of marketing people and other growth leaders. We did an AI analysis, we checked LinkedIn accounts, and we had all kinds of data. And one of the very smart questions that we asked people was, compared to your competitors over the last 3 years, financially, do you perform better or not? And we all know that. So most of these marketing people know when they, Coke knows how they score compared to Pepsi, etc. And that way we could separate the overperforming companies from the underperforming companies. And when you ask 50 questions and you can divide all the respondents, which I just showed you, about 5,000, into two groups, the winners and the losers, you kind of see what marketing is about these days. So I identified a couple of building blocks, and I don't have time to go through all the results, but what was very striking was that if you asked people, like, how do you define growth, or how do you talk about growth in the organization, that all of them say, well, top line revenue growth is very important to us. No difference, hardly any difference between the underperformers and the overperformers, between the winners and the losers. More surprising was that the underperforming companies actually had a bigger focus on bottom line growth. And we don't really know why that is, probably because they go bankrupt if they don't. What was even more surprising was that the overperforming companies, we have technology for that, is that the overperforming companies significantly differ in the way they define growth. They define growth in people terms. They said, well, growth is not just about finance, it's also about creating growth for my colleagues, the people that work in our company, for our customers, for the community and the world that we operate in. And that together was really one of the biggest conclusions. And we called that humanizing growth. They were about humanizing growth rather than just financial growth. And that was the big transition. Now we turned that into the 7 building blocks, turned that into an executive leadership course, have been doing that for 4 years. But now, 4 years later, we come to the conclusion that again, it's quite a different world. Because we had COVID, we had inflation, we all know that we are reaching the planetary boundaries. 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries have crossed, so we are in deep shit. We need to change the way we do marketing. We need to change the way we define value. But we don't really know how. We also see that those stakeholders that I just mentioned, that they are becoming more powerful, louder, more demanding. So colleagues, workers, employees, they raise their voice because they want to have a fair wage, or because lots of companies, what you see here is a protest with the United American Auto Association thingy. Sorry for all the abbreviations. But they had to decrease their wage during COVID because people didn't buy cars anymore, supply chain problems, difficulties. But now that the profits are going up, these workers are like, hey, but where is my salary? Why don't I get paid more now that the world is getting better? For good reasons. Customers, they really know, due to social media, how we produce our stuff. And they are demanding new ways of production, new ways to improve our supply chain. So they are also becoming louder. Communities. Here at Tata Steel or Schiphol or ING or all kinds of big polluting companies, where communities raise their voice and say, hey, we need to change the way you do business because we can't do business on a dead planet. We don't want to live on a dead planet, so you need to change the way you operate. But also in capital markets. So all these investors are still demanding from companies that they make a profit because that's the way the world works. That's still the capitalistic system that we live in. So these voices are becoming louder, and that makes it really difficult for marketing. And I think we've all experienced that. That sometimes you get accused of doing too little, or you get accused of doing too much. Like the CEO of Danone, he was fired basically because he didn't deliver on the profit expectations. Or we get accused of greenwashing. And the result is that marketers are kind of paralyzed. Do you recognize that, guys? That it's freaking frightening to talk about your new innovation that is completely green, or to talk about your new initiatives that is driving more equality in the lives of people. But when you communicate about it, you stick your head above the water or the hayfield and you might get cut off. So that's difficult. Now, and we see that in the research. They fear being called out to be too woke or to do greenwashing. Now, I've got 2 terrible kids and a lovely wife. I've got 2 sons, 6 and 8. And the 8-year-old, he asked me like, hey, Daddy, you're going to Istanbul, right? I said, yeah, I'm going to Istanbul. I have a global marketing summit, which I need to attend as a presenter. All right. Do you need to fly there? Well, yeah, I'm going to miss you a lot, so I need to be back quickly, and it's better to fly then. Okay. It's very bad for the environment, eh? Yeah, I know. Yeah. Why don't you make an honest assessment of your net zero strategy, Daddy? Okay. I might be doing that, exactly. Yeah, why don't you tell me how you're going to adjust your behavior? Yeah, I will. Please shut up. And Daddy, yeah, you want to see a trick? Yeah, of course I want to see a trick. Okay, here it goes. I got the trick from Case, from my class. You got to hold your hand like this, and you need to move it around without using the pulse. Oh, that's a fucking cool trick, my friend. Show me how you do it. I said, you just need to do this. And I thought that's just a great metaphor for the way we are doing business right now. We need to kind of like change the system, but we can't touch growth. Because we need growth and finance to finance the whole transition that we need to make, right? You can't do green investment without money. So we need to shift that world without touching growth. But how? That's the big question of all these marketers. So that's what we're trying to discover now. How do you make that shift without touching what it's all about, growth? So how do you implement that, and what is the role of the marketing department, the function, the chief marketer in doing that? That's what we're trying to discover. So we are now right in the middle of gathering the results of our new study, which is called the Impact Study. And we're doing that with lots of companies. Oxford is the lead partner in doing this research. And basically, it's like all these companies are taking care of one of the C's in the C-suite. So the Page Society and the SHRM, they are all about the chief HRO, because they also need to change, make that transition. The ANA and WARC are, of course, part of the CMO. Then we have, what is it? What else? Where are they? Oh, this, the NACD. They're about the board, corporate directors. So we try to identify what do people in the C-suite need to do to make the transition, and what's the role of marketing. So we talk to a lot of people, do a big quant, AI, etc., etc. And again, we are trying to separate the under and overperformers. And this time we are asking them, are you actually focusing on creating sustained value for all stakeholders? So not just profits, all stakeholders. And apparently there's a correlation, so that's good news. It's not causality, but it's correlation. And we have seen that happening over the last couple of decades. If you look at how companies define their value, then we see a shift from tangible assets to intangible assets. I know this is boring for marketing people, especially for the creative ones, but stay with me for 1 second, because what's happening here is that in the past, a company's value was determined by buildings, cash, inventory, the stuff that you own, the stuff that you can touch. Right now, most of the value of companies, 90%, is determined by intangible assets, the stuff you can't touch but determine the competitive advantage of companies. Things like culture, things like reputation, things like IQ, patents, and also the brand. And that's us. We can help those chief marketing officers deliver that value so that they can go to their board and say, marketing is an investment. You know why? Here. That's why. So let me drive that transition. And then you get to the how. How do you do that? So let me show you 5 steps that we've identified on how you can deliver that value. And the first one is about grounding yourself in the human reality. Now, we all sit in our own filter bubble. I was on This Year, Next Year last week. I don't know who was there. And it's a big media advertising, almost kind of a festival, right? It was a really huge conference. Fantastic. And the terminology that we use and the stuff that we talk about, every one of us sits in his own industry, looks through its own microscope. We have our blinders on and we think that that's the reality. But oftentimes when you look outside, the human reality is quite different. So what these overperforming companies do, they try to ground themselves in understanding that human reality, in understanding stakeholders. So for example, they have a materiality matrix, a materiality map that looks at what are the issues that are important both for us as a business as well as for the stakeholders that are important to us, our colleagues, our customers, the communities that we operate in. And that's where you can create opportunities. And that's marketing, because we are really good in sensing what's going on in society and responding to that with great storytelling campaigns and advertising. So that is really important. So for example, at one of the most valuable companies of Europe, Novo Nordisk is a Scandinavian pharmaceutical. Pharmaceuticals are often very R&D driven. White jackets, patents, they're trying to find a cure for COVID and stuff, make a lot of money. What they do to identify those new opportunities is not just about engineering and smart medicine people. It's really about understanding and engaging with stakeholders. So they have introduced this disease expert panel where they invite people with certain diseases, they invite doctors, they invite hospitals, they invite NGOs, they invite investors, analysts, all kinds of people, and they organize stuff like this to feel what they need and to respond in a way that is very human-centric. Now, once you've grounded yourself, the best marketers are also reimagining the future. Like, where is the world going to be in 20 years from now? Most companies only think about 1, 3, or 5 years. But what if we take a 50-year perspective, or maybe even longer? How does the world look like then? Can we reimagine the future? And I don't know if you've ever thought about your own future, but we often extrapolate from where we are now. It's very difficult to kind of let go of where we are and just imagine that completely new future. But that is exactly what these companies are doing, the overperforming companies. They take a long-term perspective and they look at what we call either a utopian or dystopian future. So what if everything goes right? What if we build a completely bright, green, equal future? How does the world look like then? And what does that mean for the steps we need to take today? So at General Motors, they have a CEO, Mary Barra, who is what they call a lifer. She started as an intern, now she's the CEO. She has been looking through the microscope of the auto industry her whole life. So how can she create a perspective on the future? Again, that's us. That's her marketing team. That's the agencies that can help her see where the world is going. And they came up with a zero crashes, zero emissions, and zero congestion strategy. Now that is a really good copywriter that created that turned that whole reimagining vision, that utopian vision, into 3 words. Well, 6, but you know what I mean. That's marketing again. That's us as agencies. You can also create a dystopian future. This is Hakan Bulgurlu. He's the CEO of Arçelik, Turkey. And Turkey makes white goods. Stuff like dishwashers, washing machines. Not the most fancy products, very polluting stuff. It's all plastic and metal materials that you need to mine for. And he says, you know, we have a really big challenge. In 2030, we need to make sure that every company is on par with the Paris Agreement. If we don't, then probably all the ice on all the mountains in the world will melt. And if, for example, the Himalaya starts to melt, then 2 billion people will be dislocated from where they are living now, because Pakistan, India, and China will not have enough water to feed the crops, to feed the people. So they go on a run, and you create a very serious crisis. So we need to change the world. And he wrote a fantastic book, but I think one of the most brilliant things he does, they don't have a net zero strategy for 2030, not even 2025. In 2020, they were already net zero. And it's a production company. That's really, really cool. But what he did, probably again with some great copywriters, he said, well, let's not focus on 2030. Let's focus on how many weeks we have to go. So instead of saying, somewhere 2030 we need to have changed the world, there is a big sign in every building of this company that is a countdown clock that says 220 weeks to go. And next week it's 290. Now then that's when you feel the pressure that you need to change. That's when you motivate an organization to switch gear and change something. Now, what connects today to that reimagining dystopian, utopian vision? It's the purpose of the company. And purpose as a guiding principle, as a strategic thing, not as a fancy, fluffy marketing comms kind of thing, but something that is really authentically lived by with the whole organization. And we see that in the research, that the overperforming companies have purpose as their guiding principle. Not finance, no purpose. Purpose first, finance is fueling the purpose, not the other way around. Let's do something purpose so we can then win an award, do something with our numbers. Now, when you grounded yourself, reimagine the future, it's time to focus. Most of these organizations have a really clear focus on where they want to provide value to stakeholders. Like Patagonia, which we all know, they focus on Mother Earth. Their purpose, save home planet. Sounds like NASA, it's a fashion company. Save home planet. clear focus on their most important stakeholder, which is Mother Earth. But you can also have multiple stakeholders. This is a story of Dole, one of our community members. He won the Cannes Lion 2 years ago. And they make bananas and pineapples. And they figured out that all their farmers, mostly in the Philippines, a lot of them also in Latin America, that they were throwing away 2/3 of the weight of the pineapple, the leaves, 2/3 of the weight on landfills. Nobody did anything with that. And then some smart person in the organization said, what if we can turn that into a product? And they were able to produce vegan leather, not plastic, vegan leather. I don't know if you have Feja shoes. Yes, you have. It's plastic. It's not really vegan. It's not plant-based. No worries. The whole world is, we are changing. We are on a journey. But this is the first plant-based vegan leather. So Nike knocked on the door, Tommy Hilfiger knocked on the door, Hugo Boss knocked on the door. So they're not a fruit company anymore. They're all of a sudden they're a fashion company. It's good for the farmers. It's good for the company. It's good for the whole fashion supply chain. It's good for us as the world. So they're really trying to deliver that value to all stakeholders. Very smart. And it sometimes also means that you have to have the courage to stop something. This is Norman de Greve. He used to be the chief marketing officer of CVS Health, which used to be a drugstore. Now it is a health company. So they transformed themselves. They had a new purpose. And they were looking at the company and thinking like, hey, but we still sell cigarettes. Yeah, but it's a $3 billion business. Are you going to stop that? He did. He made the argument to say, well, if you're a health company, you can't sell cigarettes, even though it's $3 billion. And on the day they announced this to investors to stop it, you know what happened? Stock price went up. So it helps to make that transition. And this is an act, not an ad. And I think that's also a transition that we as agencies should be aware of, that it's not all about ads, it's about acts, and then talk about the stories. You all know that, of course. Then it's about organizing. Now, most of these companies, they have their sustainable development goals. They know how they want to change the world, but they also know that change doesn't happen in isolation. Most of these problems are just too difficult to be solved by themselves. So what they do is they create a systemic perspective on what they need to do to change. They collaborate with all kinds of companies to figure out how they are independent or interdependent and can create that change. And let me show you again a great example of a company in our community. It's One House. The campaign is called One House. Won a Cannes Lion 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Where the chief marketing officer, it's a financial institution. They sell mortgages, insurance, financial products. And Australia is a country that is already seeing severe damage from disruptive weather events, droughts, cyclones, bushfires, all that kind of stuff. And she said, we need to change the way we construct our houses, our homes, because our homes break down. That costs an insurance company a lot. The people, when your house is burned down, that creates a lot of mental stress. Again, a lot of cost for the insurance company. So they collaborated with architects, with universities, with construction companies to figure out what is the blueprint, how should we construct a home these days to be resilient against all these damages from climate change. And most companies are waiting for the government to change a law or regulation. This company went to the government and said, here's the blueprint. You better change the law now. And then you become really political almost. But it's really a fantastic way of organizing yourself around the challenges that happen on a systemic level. Beautiful video, I'll send it to you later. Then it's time to unleash all that wonderful thoughts, that new role as a marketer. And unleashing is really about connecting your personal purpose to the purpose of the company. So that's something that we do in the program. It's actually session number 1 is helping these chief marketing officers figure out what's your place in the world. How can you authentically live the purpose of your company if you're disconnected with your own purpose? And then we identified attitudes and behaviors that they need to show and behave on how to drive that transition. And I think that there is also a great role for us because we have all these new models, frameworks, ways of thinking about how we create media and advertising, research to help these companies make the transition. I'm sure you are all aware of the carbon calculator of Group M, but we need to step up and say to our marketers, hey, why don't we start using that? There is this association, I think it's from the UK, that says change the brief. Most of the KPIs that we find in a briefing are still the standard ones. Can we also include, I don't know, CO2 footprint, or how we damage what they call the brain print, the way people think about certain things in life, like beauty or equality or whatever. There is a collective called the Conscious Attention Economy. They collaborated with United Nations and connected everything that we do as media and ad agencies to the Sustainable Development Goals. Have a look at it. It's really fantastic inspiration for you to have a conversation with those chief marketing officers to ultimately make that transition. Because in the end, as more law, as more regulation, as louder voices and more demanding stakeholders, they will probably all want us to behave more green, more equal, create value for society, and we can help them in that transition. And what we've seen in the research is that those chief marketing officers that adopt this thinking and follow the humanizing growth path actually raise their influence. Not by turning around growth, but by finding strategies to go around that. Thank you very much.